Hey babes! So for today's blunt chat, I want to talk about the lock journey and how it reflects your relationship with process. So I have seen so many women online. Obviously, some are very happy with their lock journey. They're locked in, they're happy, they're feeling it. But I've also seen some women talk about the fact that their locks make them feel masculine, or they're just having a difficult time on their lock journey. And I think that has a lot to do with perceptions and unlearning a lot of those things that we are taught when we're younger and by society about what black hair should look like when it's done and proper, and what is acceptable when it comes to black hair and how it relates to our femininity. See, a rubber band just popped, y'all. It be like that sometimes. You know, it's hard. It's hard to keep locks tamed, okay? And I think that's the fun of it. It makes you learn how to appreciate your hair in all of its forms. And so I want to kind of talk about the lock journey and your relationship with process based off of how you approach your lock journey. So stage one is that starter lock phase. I would say starter locks. We're going to start at starter locks before we even get to the budding process. So I feel like a lot of people try to grow out their hair before they get their starter locks, thinking that they can kind of skip that process and skip that moment in the process. I think it's going to be a learning lesson regardless. You can choose to grow out your hair first, or you can just get your starter locks when they're short. This is my second set of locks. I have always locked up when my hair was already short, and my thought process is, I know I want locks. I should just start the process sooner rather than later. And I think it helps kind of combine two awkward phases. A part of growing out your hair in general is like that awkward TWA phase. And I feel like if you already have starter locks, you're kind of combining those awkward phases rather than having two separate awkward phases. How many times have I said it? But your TWA phase for me could be it's like an awkward length that you're like trying to grow through. And that's the same thing with starter locks into the budding phase. You're trying to figure out how to style your hair. It's kind of an awkward length for styling. It might not be your desired length or what you feel like is most flattering for you. So I think that kind of combining those two processes has always been the way I take it, but that's just the way I go about it. But I think a lot of people choose to kind of or they already have long hair, but they think that starting with long hair will allow them to skip that awkward phase. And baby, it won't. It won't, because while your locks will obviously show the length a lot sooner than those who start when their hair is shorter, I still think that there's a process of allowing your hair to lock up that can feel really uncomfortable for people who do prioritize solely length or kept hair. And I think that because locks have become such a trend, and because I don't even want to say trend, because I think locks have always been in, but there has definitely been a resurgence of interest in locks. And I think that is because for some, it can be their relationship with whiteness that makes them desire locks. I think that some folks see the way locks can hang and the way that you can style locks, and the fact that locks can mimic what white people's hair looks like for some. And I struggle to say that because I think locks are a very black style, but I do think that some people get locks in an attempt to mimic whiteness. And they think that having long hair that falls and drops, whereas black hair typically defies gravity and grows up, I think that they assume that once they get to that lock length that they want, they'll feel more beautiful and more feminine because they are closer to whiteness. And I think that's the unfortunate part of it, because black hair is so beautiful, and I think locks are a variation of that beauty because it shows the variety and versatility of black hair. But it does dishearten me that some folks might start locks for the wrong reasons, and I think it's really impacted the way you've seen colorism and texturism start to show up in the lock community more and more. I'm sure it's always been a thing, but I feel like when locks became more popular, it definitely increased the amount of texturism. When we talk about laid edges, when we talk about combing out your ends so that you can have that 3C curl, I combed out my ends, but I got a 4C puff. So when I comb out my ends fully, it's a puff, and I style it that way sometimes. And then if I want my coil, I'll coil my hair, but I don't expect a 3C curl when I have type 4 hair. So I think that in general, texturism has really started to rear its ugly head in the loc community. And it's unfortunate because I feel like the loc community was one of the last spaces that had to feel that pain. When we think back to the natural hair movement and when everyone was getting their big chop, everyone was embracing their natural hair, there was a moment where like it was so pure and everyone was truly just loving black hair in all of its forms, in all of its textures, in all of its coils. And then as it became more commodified, then you started to see the texturism about prioritizing the 3C hair and those voluptuous, like those very circular froze with the loose curls. All of those things became more and more of the standard for what natural hair should look like as the movement got commodified. And I think the same thing is happening with locks, where you're seeing people really have a desire for locks that are formed out of looser textures, because the way someone with 3C hair is going to lock up is so different from how someone with 4C hair is going to lock up. And both are beautiful, but I definitely think there's a preference for one over the other. With that being said, all that to say, starter phase is like you're excited to get your locks. You might be trying to start it with a little longer so that you can get to your end result faster. But I think when you're thinking of it that way, it also reflects that you sometimes might be in a rush to get to the final result or skip the hard parts of process in a desire for that end result that you want so badly, which is like no judgment on any of these things because we all have our own ways of approaching process. But I do think that the beauty of the loc journey is embracing every phase of it, taking us to step 2, which is like the budding phase. Your locks are becoming toddlers, I would say. They're like unruly, they're biting everything. They don't want to listen to you, like the terrible twos. I think that the budding phase is the most difficult phase for people because this is when you truly have to embrace your hair as is. You have to let it do its thing. And this is what people call the ugly phase. And I get it, but I want us to stop saying that because I do, it reflects our, once again, relationship with process. The budding phase is that point in your process where you're trying and you're learning and it's not perfect. So you're like a little embarrassed of it, right? Like when you're learning a new skill or doing anything new, there's that initial excitement of starting the process. And then you get into the budding phase where like you're having to work through those kinks. You're having to learn how to do all of the things that will get you to that end result. And sometimes it can be hard when you feel like people are watching you go through that phase. I personally tend to do head wraps during the budding phase. Because I personally am very private when it comes to that part of process. So I do think that reflects my mindset when it comes to process. When it comes to learning and trying to get good at something, I like to kind of go into hibernation and go through all of that ugly process by myself. And then I like to like pop out with all the new skills, right? And that's something I'm having to unlearn, but it showed up in my loc journey because I would wrap my hair for the budding phase because I didn't want to attempt to I didn't want to slow down the process by trying to do something with my hair, but I also wasn't fully comfortable just going out with my hair in the budding phase. I will also say I'm not one of those girls who can do all the crazy good creative styles. You know what I mean? I do what I can, but I'm not. And that's one of the reasons I locked up. I don't want to have to style my hair every day. And so I think there's some people who know how to make their budding phase a cute little look. For me, I was letting it rock. Okay. And so I would pop on a head wrap and call it a day. And so I think that that's reflective of my way that I like to go about it. Some people will put on a wig, and I think that reflects their own way of wanting to move through the process. Everyone has their different way of, some people fully embrace it, and I respect those girlies because wow, you have learned to fully embrace every aspect of the phase and you have no shame. And I'm not saying shame in a way that like you should be ashamed, but I think that society has made it where as Black women, we feel the need to like constantly have our hair together in order to feel worthy of perception, of being perceived, of being looked at. I will also say, back to my starter lock phase, my first set of locks, I did coils. My second set of this set of locks, I did 2-strand twists because my hair was shorter this time that I locked up. And so the stylist recommended me doing 2-strand twists because it would hold. I think coils held better for me. I feel like my hair took a longer time to lock up in the 2 strands because every time that I had to wash it for a retwist, it would basically be an afro again. And I'm like, girl, versus the coils held. Period. Like the coils held their shape. It wasn't unraveling. Like obviously the root would be puffy, but I would just add to the coils. So I feel like coils work best for my hair type. Whereas the twists were a harder thing to keep in. And I also think that has something to do with like the 2 strands having to lock around each other versus the 1 coil being able to lock up. But nonetheless, I made it through it and here we are today. Okay, so we've gone through the starter stage and then the budding phase. So I think that the budding phase is most difficult for people because that's the phase where you truly have to unlearn all negative perceptions about your Black hair. And I think that can be really tough, but worth it. And in the same way that we recommend everyone chopping their hair once in their life, if you're going through the lock journey, I truly encourage you to embrace the budding stage and really sit there and think about how it makes you feel and why and all of those things, because you'll learn a lot about how you perceive yourself, your Blackness, and your femininity. I think this is when people say, oh, locks make me feel masculine. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that femininity is really based off of white femininity. And so a lot of people are very drawn to long hair. They feel like long hair is more feminine. They might feel like certain colors of hair are more feminine. They might feel like certain textures are more feminine. And I think that the budding phase is a phase where you may not have the length. Your hair is fully going to show its texture. And you're like almost in your natural, you're in your fully natural raw state. And I think that's very uncomfortable for Black women when so often we've been told that we need to curate our hair. We have to curate the way that we look in order to feel and embrace our femininity. But you can very much so be a pretty feminine girly girl in your budding phase. And I encourage you to think about the ways and what make you feel feminine and what you deem as feminine. Because I think that so often, okay, this might be controversial, but I think that a lot of people go into the lock journey again for that final result. They want the booty length locks, swing that bit, and they think that they're going to feel like the feminine pretty princess because their hair is long and it's hanging like white girls do. And yes, you can want long hair, but let's question why you want long hair. Let's question whether you're chasing after a form of femininity that is not based on you. Because I think that Black women, we have our own version of femininity that is equally beautiful, if not more so. So I just think that the budding phase can be really uncomfortable for folks who have embraced a white supremacist version of beauty and femininity. And that's why it really disheartens me when I see Black women online saying that locks make them feel masculine, locks make them feel like a little boy, all of those things, because we internally have to perceive ourselves and embody our femininity. And those who are aligned with the way you perceive yourself and the way that you perceive femininity will automatically be attracted to you, right? Not on like a romantic sense, but like even a platonic sense. In general, when you're your most authentic self, you will attract people who relate to and appreciate those things. And I don't think that people should try to fit a version of femininity that was never made for us. We can do all of the things in the world, and that's when you start thinking through like the Black Barbie and like why Black women have to be so exceptional in order to be deemed feminine, right? So budding phase is the one that I think a lot of people have trouble with. And the way you approach that phase will tell you a lot about how not only do you perceive process, but how you perceive your Blackness, your femininity, and the way that you perceive beauty. All right. So after the budding phase, I think it starts to become a little bit more smooth. Your locks have locked up. It might be an awkward length depending on how you started, but they're finally starting to hold their shape. They're listening. You're finding your groove. I think there's like a fun stage when you can do the bangs. I have a middle part. Like my first set, I feel like I didn't have as much of a middle part. And I realized that as I was going through the process that like it was easier to style when I almost had like a bowl cut. I feel like the middle part can make it awkward to style when you're at shorter lengths. But when you're at that phase where you could do like a little baby bang, that's fun because your hair is like that perfect length where it's not covering your eyes, but you can cover the 5-hit. So, I mean, I think that's when it kind of gets fun. You can do the short lock styles, all of those things. And then it's kind of smooth sailing from there. I think the most difficult part of the lock journey is truly in the beginning. And that's because that's when we're having to go through the process, right? And I think all of us have a very uncomfortable relationship with process, especially in today's day and age where it's like almost seen as cringe to be trying. And I think that that's like the phase of the beginning and budding stages. It's like you're trying something new, you're trying to get to a final result that people are gonna love. But during that beginning stage, everyone has comments. Do something with your hair. Are you going to style it? Are you going to comb it? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? Everyone has an opinion on how your locks look, especially in that starter phase. And you kind of have to learn to tune it out. You have to learn to tune it out because when your locks get long and they're hanging and they're draping, then everybody wants to say, oh my God, your hair is so beautiful, da 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 da. And so I think that it shows not only our relationship with process, but the way that others perceive us in the process. And I think that when you move through the way people are perceiving you and the projections that they might have about your hair and your beauty, that is like a powerful thing. And so I encourage you, as whether you've gone through the lock process already or if you're going through the lock process, I encourage you to really think through how you handled your lock journey, what parts made you uncomfortable and why. And, see if you can apply that to other parts of your life when it comes to embracing or learning new things, when it comes to your evolution as an individual. I'm currently reading this book called The Pleasures of Process, or the Pleasures of the Process. It's actually a poetry book. It was written by one of my grandfather's friends, I think. I found it in our home library. And I think it's been really nice because I've been evaluating the way that I perceive and move through process as I try to embark on a lot of new journeys in my life. And I realize that I'm deeply uncomfortable with the being seen trying phase. I'm deeply uncomfortable with the part where I suck at it, but I'm still trying, and I'll eventually get to that final result. I'll eventually be able to execute the things that I see in my, imagination and the things that I'm trying to manifest. But working up to that point can be very difficult and almost like you kind of feel a little embarrassed because you're so critical of your process and I'm so critical of my process. So I'm learning to embrace the process. I think that it also allows me to appreciate the present moment rather than hyperfixating on the future and what the future will be because of the process I'm going through. I think that's how I've always framed things. It's like, I know that I'm going through this process because the end result is going to be amazing, rather than appreciating the process in itself, appreciating the present moment in itself, knowing that, yes, the result will be just as great, but you can enjoy that once you're there in that present moment. So I hope this was a little bit helpful of a video, not helpful, but I hope it was a little bit thought-provoking and made you think about your relationship with your lock journey or how you can approach your lock journey or any other processes that you might be going through in life. Life is a constant evolution, and I always encourage us to be thinking about the way that we approach things, our mindsets, our thoughts, because those are the things that help us grow and evolve. And so thanks for chatting. I hope that, leave a comment. I want to have a combo with you guys. But I really appreciate you tuning in, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.